Hello and welcome to the Angerati studio here at Itron Utility Week 2016. And I'm joined now by Emma Ritch, who's the Global Business Development Manager for ABB Wireless. So Emma, welcome.
Thank you so much.
And I know you've been on your feet the whole day, so it must be quite nice to sit down a little bit.
Exactly.
Although in a somewhat strange setting on a stage like this. But Emma, you and I were talking a little bit off air about, and some of the clue of what we're going to be talking about is the fact that you come from ABB Wireless section as well. So let's give this whole interview a little bit of context.
Yeah.
And you're seeing, and you want to talk about some of the changing requirements for smart grid networks that utilities are adopting, especially in the context of distributed automation. So my job is to get you to talk. So tell us a little bit about what you guys are seeing.
Well, I think utilities have learned from some of the issues and challenges that the early adopters have faced. When they implemented a network just for their AMI or just for their AMR solution, they weren't considering all the additional devices that were going to come on board and the different requirements that all of those will have. So when you look at distribution automation, reclosers, cap banks, fault current indicators, and your substation automation and security and mobile workforce, the other applications that utilities are having to consider with the smart grid, you need higher bandwidth, lower latency. So you really have to take into context the different networking requirements of all the applications you're considering today, as well as into the future when you're building out your comms plan.
So in effect, this comms layer that was put in for AMI, which, and I'm going to be simplistic about it, but just to illustrate the point, where perhaps the use case was much more about a polling use case, right?
Exactly.
Let's get the meter read back. Let's bill someone. Now suddenly we're talking to, I remember we did a webinar recently about this, where actually what we're talking about is 100% uptime in communications, right? We need that sort of speed. How is that challenged? Because that's a leap, right?
Yeah.
From one to the other. And what are you seeing at ABB Wireless, how people are adopting that?
Yeah, well, it's to your point, if you're doing meter reads and you miss a read, as long as you get that information within 24 hours, it's not mission critical. But when you're looking at the mission critical DA and substation applications, you need a much more resilient, secure and reliable network. So we like to say the 5 nines of reliability, the 99.999%.
So how do you get there? Because there's another debate that's going on, and when I say debate, I suppose it's a positioning statement. So when you've got one use case, you're transitioning to another. People have been using public networks, and now that is shifting somewhat, right?
Yeah, I would say that public networks are a complementary solution to some of the private networking solutions. There really is no one communications technology that applies to all smart grid scenarios. So you really need to consider kind of a comprehensive network infrastructure that goes across different technologies. And so that would be a mix of public and private networks. It would be mesh architectures as well as point-to-point, point-to-multipoint, whatever the use case and that endpoint calls for based on the topology, the density, the distance, the bandwidth requirements. That's what you should take into consideration instead of trying to make one technology fit all of your purposes.
So if I replay that, what you're actually saying is it's like going, don't get signed up to one technology.
Right. Look
at where you're going and put in the ecosystem. I mean, how easy is that for a utility to do? Because I would imagine those early adopters with AMI probably, tried to do the best job they can, but they couldn't have foreseen some of the use cases that are coming on now. So how do you architect a network that can actually grow with those use cases?
Yeah, I mean, it's much easier for the greenfield deployments. We're working in partnership with Itron at DTE in Michigan. We also just recently announced we're doing kind of a ground-up installation in Memphis. And it's very easy when you're planning your entire communications network to make use of all the different technologies that way. But it's, you can go back in and start to network devices without, ripping and replacing. You can supplement what you have. I think the challenge is making sure you're using the right technology for the right endpoint and that application, and then making sure you can manage across all the different applications.
Is more and more of this stuff going, I'm not trying to tee you up, but is more and more of this stuff going wireless? Because I remember it's like used to talk about the wireless networking space, okay, the spectrum issues and so on. Let's not go there because that's a separate side of things. But wireless communications is getting faster. Mesh networking and that type of topology that you can put in is building the resilience. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that the default go-to communication?
I'd say that...
I'm not talking about protocols, I'm just talking about in general.
I'd say with utilities, when there's a fiber core, we absolutely try to leverage that as much as possible. But laying that fiber is expensive, it's costly, it's time consuming. And so sometimes there's a need to connect. Maybe you have a fiber network to all your substations. Maybe there's a remote substation that you can't run fiber to because of cost restrictions. And so wireless communication solutions are allowing utilities more flexibility at a better price point to access many of these new opportunities with the new intelligent endpoints.
So let's take that one level on. So I accept all of that. So you've got a substation that's remote, so you've got a wireless link to it, or point-to-point, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, it's a wireless link. But it seems to me like you've got this whole plethora of different networks.
Yes.
I'm trying to choose my words carefully because we're talking to engineers and they'll correct me very quickly on our website if I'm using the wrong words. So you've got this really complex topology. Mm-hmm. How do you manage that in a unified way?
Yeah.
How do you retain oversight over the whole thing?
Yeah. I mean, we've looked at utilities and they're operating anywhere from 2 to more than 10 networks individually. Each one has its own management system, and it's a real problem. From a cost perspective, from your operators' times, from efficiency. So that's one thing that we've really worked towards at ABB Wireless, is to make sure that we have our solutions as well as partner solutions all visible and controllable from one communications network management system. So you can troubleshoot, you can provision, you can deep dive into individual endpoints, whether they are in a mesh, in a point-to-point, whether it's by us or by one of our partners.
And I mean, how easy is that to execute? Because the devil's always in the detail. So if someone comes to you and say, "Hey, I've got this piece of software that will give you one console." I mean, what's the reality? I mean, how? If we were to role play, I came to you and I said, "Look, I've got all of these different things. I've got a Cisco IP network here. I've got a fiber network here. I've got a legacy protocol network here, and so on." Yeah. How easy is that for you guys to bring into this sort of unified management console?
I mean, I think if it were easy, everyone would be doing it.
Right.
We started with our own products, so with our own broadband mesh solutions, and then as we did more R&D, developed more technologies, more architectures, then started bringing in our partner solutions into there. So kind of as our utility customers have asked for it, we've made more of these solutions available and controllable from one central place.
And is this product still one that requires integration? Right? This is not like you put it in and it all works. It's not plug and play. It's not magic.
It's plug and play for our solutions and those that have already been integrated. Yeah.
And now, just looking ahead a little bit, distribution automation is something where and I don't want to dumb it down too much because we're talking to an informed audience, but everybody's digitizing the grid. You talked about AMI, we're talking about digital substations. We did a lot of work with the digital substation division at ABB. We're talking about the new different control layers that are coming over it, that remote management. It seems to me that as that layer digitizes more and more, how are you facilitating the interplay between those things? Because there must be some efficiencies that can be gained by connecting the AMI system with the substation system, because that gives you some idea of load, and this is where you manage it, right?
Yeah, I'd say that when we look at the neighborhood area networks that have been deployed for AMI, generally you're looking at a megabit per second or less, and that's suitable for some DA applications. You do have to be careful in terms of prioritizing traffic, especially as you mentioned, kind of meter to cache process is most important. So you have to look at the ability to prioritize across different applications, as well as the latencies that are necessary. As more of these new applications kind of are put in the field, it's going to vary in terms of what the requirements would be. So I'd say latency, I'd say bandwidth, security, and prioritization are some of the facets of this that you have to consider.
So just drilling into those a little bit. So you mentioned latency, bandwidth. So all of this, it's getting more and more interconnected. It's getting more and more real time.
Yes.
That puts a whole different pressure on any network. A network you've got. You mentioned at the top that companies are looking to have the reliance on public networks in a more containerized place and starting to build private networks. Yeah. This must be like a huge challenge to utilities. You're suddenly talking about communications architecture. You're talking about a skill set that is not necessarily in the DNA of the utility. I mean, how are those challenges being met?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Some utilities have those competencies and that expertise in-house, but many don't. And many are challenged when they need to operate all of these networks over time too. So that's why it's especially important for us to kind of help utilities early in terms of building a comprehensive communications plan that has multiple tiers of connectivity. And when you look at a multi-tiered network, your neighborhood area network, your field area network, and then your utility core and backbone, each of those can be upgraded over time without impacting the others. So if you look at an AMI or kind of smart grid device, that's expected to be in the field for 15 to 20 years.
Right.
And so you want to be able to upgrade the different pieces of the network as you're upgrading devices instead of having to replace the whole thing.
And just as we sort of coming to the end of our time here, I always find it interesting to talk to someone like you. I mean, the clues in your title, a global business development manager, right? So, a part of your job is to facilitate these systems being adopted.
Yeah.
Can you give us some sort of sense about, are there, on a global level, are there any geos where you're seeing a lot more traction about the smart grid narrative and actually putting this sort of 5 nines comms layer over the top of it? Are there any sort of highlights you can pull out?
You mean from a global perspective, like different markets?
Exactly.
I mean, in the U.S. market, I think a lot of the large AMI deals, have already been, they've chosen their path. So what we see is those utilities that have already done AMI now coming back looking for a solution for DA because they're finding their existing networks aren't really capable of delivering what they could do.
So it's really the DA piece that is now pushing the next wave of investment.
And exactly. The cost benefit from DA can be significantly more for certain utilities than AMI. And so that is driving, I think, a lot of interest, especially in these kind of higher capacity, more resilient networks that we offer at ABB Wireless. But of course, a lot of the smaller and mid-sized utilities in the U.S. are looking at AMI now. From a global perspective, especially Asia, Middle East, South America, AMI still, there are huge opportunities. And so it's important, is that they also learn from the early adopters in the US who maybe installed a network initially that is not capable of doing all the things they initially thought.
And are you seeing those regions really looking at that long-term planning and say, all right, okay, well, AMI is the current use case, but we really want to, off the bat, build a comms network that can also do DA and so on, because there's a fine line to be done in those areas. They're industrializing and developing rather rapidly, so the electric infrastructure needs to follow that pace. Mm-hmm. But you can't always greenfield everything.
But you look at, like I said, the return on investment for a lot of the DA and substation automation applications can be faster than for AMI for electric, gas, and water. So when they look at the best bang for their buck, they're looking at some of those DA applications.
So rolling it all into one actually gives a faster. Can you give us an order of magnitude of the ROI? I mean, just in general cases, you say, look, if you just focus on this one use case, you're looking at 10 years, but if you put it all together, you might be looking at 3 to 5 or something like that.
And as much as you can leverage the same network infrastructure, even if it's not fully built out, if you have that plan for the long-term deployment, that's just going to make your cost structure even more attractive.
And Emma, on that note, we're nearly at the end, but one of the things I wanted to do is tee up this video, because we are going to do a short piece on your booth where it's very hard in a conversation like this to bring some of these technologies to life. So for those of you watching, look for that. If we've done our job right, it should link to this somehow. I'll leave that to other people. But Emma, thank you very much for joining us. It's
Thank you for
been a pleasure
having
talking
me.
to you. And thank you as well for watching. This has been another Engerati interview at Itron Utility Week. Many more are going to be on our website, and you can watch and enjoy those there.